The golden rays of late afternoon sun painted the Whitmore estate in warm amber hues. Ancient oak trees lined the long gravel driveway, their branches creating a natural canopy over the path that led to the grand mansion. This had been home to the Whitmore family for 3 generations, a symbol of wealth and tradition that stood proudly against the rolling hills of the countryside. Easton Whitmore stepped out of the black sedan, breathing in the familiar scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. At 22, he had grown into a handsome young man with dark hair and striking blue eyes that seemed to hold the weight of expectations. 3 years at Oxford studying business had changed him, made him more serious, more aware of the responsibilities that awaited him as the sole heir to the Whitmore fortune. "Welcome home, sir," greeted Thomas, the family butler who had worked for the Whitmores since before Easton was born. "Your parents are in the drawing room expecting you for tea." Easton nodded, but instead of heading straight inside, he found himself drawn to the gardens that sprawled behind the mansion. The estate grounds had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the suffocating weight of his family's expectations. As he walked along the stone pathways, memories of his childhood flooded back. It was there, near the fountain surrounded by blooming roses, that he first saw her again. Mia was kneeling by the flower beds, her delicate hands carefully tending to the white lilies. Her long auburn hair caught the sunlight, creating a halo effect that made her look almost ethereal. She wore a simple white sundress that complemented her sun-kissed skin, and when she looked up at the sound of his approaching footsteps, her emerald green eyes widened in surprise. "Easton," she whispered, rising gracefully to her feet. "You're back." "Hello, Mia," he replied, his voice softer than he intended. "You've grown beautiful." She blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, in a gesture he remembered from their childhood. Mia had always been the gardener's daughter, 3 years younger than him, but they had been friends once, before social expectations and family pressure had driven them apart. "Your father will be pleased to see the gardens looking so perfect," she said, trying to maintain the proper distance between them. "I've been working hard to make sure everything is ready for your return." "You've done an amazing job," Easton said, moving closer despite the voice in his head, warning him to maintain his distance. "But I wasn't talking about the flowers," the say. Weeks that followed were like a dream. Despite his family's busy social calendar and business meetings, Easton found himself drawn to the gardens every evening. Mia would be there, finishing her work as the sun began to set, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. She told him about her dreams of becoming a teacher, how she was saving money from her work at the estate to pay for college. He shared his fears about taking over the family business, about living up to his father's legacy. In those quiet moments, surrounded by the beauty of the gardens she tended so lovingly, the differences in their social status seemed to fade away. "Do you remember when we were children?" Mia asked one evening as they sat by the old oak tree that had been their favorite hiding spot. "You used to say you would run away and become a pirate." Easton laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "And you said you would come with me as the ship's navigator because you were the only one who could read the stars." "I still can," she said softly, looking up at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Though I think I'd rather be a teacher now than a pirate." "You'd make a wonderful teacher," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "You have such a gentle way of explaining things, such patience." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and suddenly the air between them seemed charged with electricity. Without thinking, Easton reached out to touch her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "Mia," he whispered, and she didn't pull away. The kiss happened slowly, tentatively, as if they both knew they were crossing a line from which there would be no return. Her lips were soft and warm, and when she kissed him back, it felt like coming home and embarking on a great adventure all at once. From that night forward, they met in secret, stolen moments in the gardens, hidden kisses under. The old oak tree whispered promises of a future that seemed impossible but felt so right. Easton had never experienced anything like the love he felt for Mia. It was pure and honest, untainted by the political marriages and social climbing that characterized his parents' world. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially in a house full of servants who had watched Easton grow up. "This has to stop," his mother, Victoria Whitmore, declared during a tense family meeting in his father's study. Her usually perfect composure was cracked, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "The gardener's daughter, Easton? Really?" "Her name is Mia," he said firmly. "And I love her." His father, Richard Whitmore, remained calm, but his words cut deep. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford, son. You have responsibilities, obligations to this family and our legacy. The girl is pretty, I'll give you that, but she's not suitable for a Whitmore. She's intelligent, kind, hardworking. She's poor," his mother interrupted. "She has no education, no connections, nothing to offer our family except scandal and embarrassment." The argument continued late into the night, but Easton's parents had already made their decision. The next morning, he was informed that he would be returning to Oxford immediately to begin an accelerated graduate program. His belongings were already packed, and a car was waiting to take him to the airport. "What about Mia?" he demanded, but his parents' expressions remained unmoved. "The girl will be fine," his father said dismissively. "Her family has been well compensated for any inconvenience. She understands that it's over." Easton tried to reach Mia before leaving, but she seemed to have vanished. The house staff claimed they hadn't seen her, and when he went to the small cottage where she lived with her father, he found it empty. A neighbor told him that the family had moved away suddenly, something about a job opportunity in another town. Standing in the garden where they had shared so many precious moments, Easton felt his heart break. The old oak tree stood silent witness to his pain, its branches swaying gently in the morning breeze as if trying to offer comfort. As the car pulled away from the estate, carrying him toward a future that felt empty without Mia, Easton pressed his face to the window and watched the gardens disappear. He didn't know that in a small cottage 20 miles away, Mia was doing the same thing, watching his world fade into the distance as she cradled the secret that would change both their lives forever. The love they thought could conquer anything had been torn apart by forces beyond their control. But the story was far from over. Sometimes the strongest love is the one that endures separation, growing deeper and more precious with time, waiting for the moment when fate will bring two hearts together again. 7 years had passed since that devastating morning when Easton was torn away from everything his heart desired. London had become his home, or at least the place where he resided. His apartment in Mayfair was elegant and sophisticated, filled with expensive furniture and artwork that impressed clients and business associates. But it never felt warm, never felt like the sanctuary he had once found in the gardens of his family estate. Easton had thrown himself into work with an intensity that worried even his demanding parents. The graduate program had led to a position at one of London's most prestigious investment firms, where his family name opened doors and his sharp intellect kept them open. At 29, he was already a partner, commanding respect and earning millions, yet every success felt hollow. He dated occasionally, usually elegant women from the right families with the right connections. His mother would send him newspaper clippings of their engagements and weddings, subtle hints that it was time for him to settle down appropriately. But every relationship ended the same way, with Easton realizing that none of these women could fill the Mia-shaped hole in his heart. "You're becoming a workaholic hermit," his friend James complained during one of their rare dinners together. "When was the last time you took a proper vacation? When was the last time you smiled genuinely?" Easton stared into his wine glass, seeing his reflection distorted in the red liquid. "I smile. That thing you do during business meetings doesn't count," James replied. I'm talking about real joy, real happiness. You used to have that. No, before university. What happened to change you so completely? The answer was simple but impossible to share. What had happened was Mia, and losing her had changed everything about who he was and who he wanted to become. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in a small coastal town, Mia was facing her own struggles with a strength that would have amazed anyone who knew her story. The cottage she now called home was tiny compared to the gardener's quarters at the Whitmore estate, but it was filled with love and laughter thanks to the most precious thing in her life. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids?" 6-year-old Emma asked one evening as Mia tucked her into bed. The little girl had Easton's striking blue eyes and his determined chin, though her hair was the same auburn color as her mother's. Mia's heart clenched as it did every time Emma asked this question. How could she explain to a child that her father didn't even know she existed? That his family had made it clear that a relationship between them was impossible? "Some families are different, sweetheart," Mia said gently, smoothing Emma's hair. "Some have mamas and daddies, some have just mamas or just daddies, and some have grandparents or aunts and uncles. What matters is that you're loved very much. But don't you think my daddy would want to meet me?" Emma persisted with the logic that only children possess. "Maybe he doesn't know about me. Maybe if we told him he would come and live with us." Tears threatened to spill from Mia's eyes, but she held them back. "Maybe someday, little one. But for now, it's just you and me, and we're doing just fine, aren't we?" Emma nodded sleepily, but Mia could see the questions weren't finished, just postponed. As her daughter drifted off to sleep, Mia sat in the tiny living room and looked at the small framed photo she kept hidden in her jewelry box. It was the only picture she had of Easton, taken during one of their secret meetings in the garden. His smile was genuine and full of love, and looking at it still made her heart race after all these years. The past 7 years had been the hardest of her life. When the Whitmores had forced her family to leave the estate, they had been given enough money to start over, but it came with the condition that they never contact Easton again. Her father, understanding the impossible situation, had moved them to this small town where he found work as a groundskeeper for the local park. Mia had been 3 months pregnant when they left, though she hadn't known it at the time. The discovery had been both terrifying and miraculous. Despite the circumstances, she had never for a moment considered any option other than having the baby. This child was a part of Easton, a living symbol of the love they had shared, and she would protect and cherish that gift no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. She had managed to finish high school through correspondence courses while pregnant, and later took online college classes while working various jobs to support Emma and contribute to the household expenses. Her dream of becoming a teacher had been postponed but never abandoned. She was now just 1 semester away from earning her degree, attending classes in the evenings while Emma stayed with her grandfather. The work was exhausting, the schedule grueling, but Mia found strength in Emma's bright smile and curious questions. Her daughter was intelligent and creative, always drawing pictures or making up elaborate stories about fairy tale princesses and brave knights. Sometimes, in Emma's imaginary tales, there was always a missing prince who would someday return to make everything perfect. "Tell me about the prince again, Mama," Emma would say during their bedtime story ritual. "Well," Mia would begin, her voice soft with memory, "he was the kindest, most handsome prince in all the land. He had eyes as blue as the ocean and a smile that could light up the darkest day. He loved gardens and flowers, and he once told the princess that she was more beautiful than all the roses in his kingdom." "And where did he go?" Emma would ask, even though she knew the story by heart. "He had to go far away to learn how to be a king," Mia would reply. But the princess never stopped believing that someday, when the time was right, he would find his way back to her. It was a fairy tale, of course, a gentle fiction to explain the complicated reality of their situation. But sometimes, in the Quiet moments after Emma fell asleep, Mia would allow herself to believe in happy endings, too. In London, Easton's phone was ringing insistently, pulling him away from the financial reports spread across his desk. The caller ID showed his father's name, and Easton hesitated before answering. These calls usually meant one of two things: business opportunities or marriage expectations. "Son, I need you to come home." Richard Whitmore's voice was uncharacteristically subdued. "Your mother hasn't been well, and the doctors think, well, they think it would be good for her to have family close by for a while." The news hit Easton like a physical blow. Despite their disagreements over the years, he loved his parents and couldn't bear the thought of losing his mother. "How serious is it?" "Serious enough," his father replied. "I know you've built a life there, but we need you here. The family business needs you, and frankly, so do we." As Easton hung up the phone and began making arrangements to return home, he had no idea that fate was finally ready to intervene. The same twist of destiny that had torn him away from Mia 7 years ago was about to bring them together again, in a reunion that would change everything for both of them and the daughter he didn't yet know existed. The cottage where Mia and Emma lived was only 30 miles from the Whitmore estate, close enough that sometimes, when the wind was just right, Mia could smell the jasmine that grew wild in the countryside around her childhood home. She never imagined that soon, very soon, the love she had never stopped believing in would walk back into her life. The familiar sight of the Whitmore estate should have brought Easton comfort. But as his car wound up the long driveway, all he felt was a complicated mixture of nostalgia and dread. The gardens were still immaculately maintained, though he noticed they seemed somehow less vibrant than in his memories. Perhaps it was because the one person who had truly understood their beauty was no longer there to tend them. His mother's illness had indeed been serious, but the excellent medical care and her own stubborn determination had pulled her through the worst of it. Now, 3 months after his return, Victoria Whitmore was regaining her strength, though she moved more slowly and tired more easily than before. The experience had changed her in subtle ways, making her more reflective, more aware of what truly mattered in life. "You've been home for 3 months and you still look miserable," she observed one morning as they shared breakfast on the terrace overlooking the gardens. "I thought being back would make you happy." Easton looked up from his untouched eggs, surprised by his mother's directness. "I'm fine, Mother, just adjusting to being back." "No, you're not fine," she said firmly. "You haven't been fine for 7 years, and I think I know why." The conversation that followed was unlike any they had ever had. Victoria spoke about her own youth, about the young man she had loved before marrying Easton's father, about the choices made for duty rather than happiness. She talked about regret and the way it could poison a life if left unaddressed. "I was so afraid of scandal, so concerned with what people would think," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But watching you these past months, seeing how empty your success has left you, I realized that the real scandal would be watching my son waste his life because I was too proud to admit I might have been wrong." That afternoon, against his better judgment, but driven by a need he couldn't ignore, Easton drove to the small coastal town where his private investigator had located Mia years ago. He had hired the investigator in a moment of weakness 3 years after leaving home, needing to know that she was safe and well. The report had been brief. Mia Collins, working as a teaching assistant while finishing her education degree, living quietly with her father and daughter. Daughter. The word had hit him like a lightning bolt when he first read it. The timing was unmistakable, and yet he had convinced himself it was impossible. Surely, if she had been pregnant with his child, she would have found a way to tell him. Surely his parents, despite their threats and manipulations, wouldn't have kept something so important from him. But as he parked outside the small primary school where Mia now worked as a fully qualified teacher, those old doubts came rushing back. Through the classroom window, he could see her helping a group of young students with their reading. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her face animated with the passion she had always had for learning and sharing knowledge. The school day was ending, and Easton watched as children began streaming out of the building into the arms of waiting parents. That's when he saw her, a little girl with familiar blue eyes and auburn hair running toward Mia with a backpack bouncing against her small shoulders. "Mama! Mama! Look what I drew today!" the child called out, waving a colorful picture above her head. Easton's breath caught in his throat. The resemblance was unmistakable. This was his daughter, the child he had never known existed. As he watched Mia scoop the little girl into a warm embrace, he felt 7 years of questions and pain crystallize into a single, overwhelming truth. His legs felt unsteady as he approached them, his carefully planned words disappearing from his mind. Mia looked up and saw him, and for a moment, time stopped completely. Her face went through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, fear, and something that might have been hope. "Easton," she whispered, instinctively pulling Emma closer. "Hello, Mia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Then, looking down at the little girl who was studying him with curious blue eyes, he added, "And you must be Emma." The child looked between her mother and this strange man, sensing the tension in the air. "How do you know my name?" Before Easton could respond, Mia intervened. "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go play on the swings for a few minutes? I need to talk to this gentleman." As Emma skipped away, chattering to herself about her drawing, Mia and Easton stood facing each other with 7 years of separation and unanswered questions between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, though his tone held no accusation, only pain. "I tried," Mia replied, tears starting to fall. "I wrote you letters, called the university, even tried to contact your parents, but every attempt was blocked. Your father made it very clear that any communication from me would result in my family losing everything they had been given to start over." The full weight of his parents' deception hit Easton like a physical blow. They hadn't just separated him from the woman he loved. They had kept him from his own child. His hands clenched into fists as he struggled to contain his anger, not at Mia, but at the years of lies and manipulation. "I never stopped loving you," he said suddenly, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "Not for a single day, in 7 years. I built a life. I achieved everything my parents wanted for me, but none of it meant anything without you." Mia's composure finally broke, and she sobbed openly. "I waited for you. Even when everyone told me to move on, to find someone else, I couldn't. You were it for me, Easton. You were everything." They talked for hours that day, sitting on a bench while Emma played nearby, filling in 7 years of separation with words and tears and tentative touches. Easton learned about Emma's first steps, her first words, her love of drawing and storytelling. Mia heard about his success in London, his empty relationships, his desperate search for meaning in a life without love. "She asks about you," Mia admitted. "Not by name, of course, but she asks about her father. I tell her stories about a prince who had to go away, and she always wants to know when he'll come back." Easton looked over at Emma, who was now drawing in the sand with a stick, completely absorbed in her creation. "What do we do now?" he asked. "How do we fix this?" "I don't know," Mia replied honestly. "Your parents, the social differences, nothing has really changed." "Everything has changed," Easton said firmly. "I've changed. I know what matters now. And it's not money or social status or my parents' approval. It's you and Emma and the family we should have been all along." The conversation with his parents that evening was explosive. Richard Whitmore raged about. Family reputation and business interests, while Victoria initially stood by her husband's position. But when Easton threatened to leave forever, taking his inheritance and his love with him, something shifted. "You kept my daughter from me," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You let me believe the woman I loved had abandoned me, and you let her struggle alone with my child. Nothing you say can justify that." It was Victoria who broke first, perhaps moved by her recent brush with mortality, perhaps finally understanding the depth of her son's pain. "What do you want us to do?" she asked, her voice small and defeated. "I want you to meet your granddaughter," Easton replied. "I want you to apologize to Mia for the way you treated her. And I want your blessing for what I'm going to do next." The family dinner that took place 2 weeks later was awkward but transformative. Emma, dressed in her best dress and overwhelmed by the grandeur of the Whitmore mansion, nonetheless charmed her grandparents with her intelligence and sweet nature. Victoria, in particular, seemed enchanted by the little girl who had her son's eyes and stubborn chin. Mia was nervous but gracious, accepting the Whitmores' stiff apologies with dignity and grace. Richard, though still struggling with his prejudices, couldn't deny that his son was happier than he had been in years. As the evening wound down and Emma fell asleep in Easton's arms for the first time, Victoria pulled Mia aside for a private conversation. "I was wrong," the older woman admitted. "I let my fears and pride hurt my son and keep me from knowing my granddaughter. I can't undo the past 7 years, but I hope you'll let me try to be part of their future." 6 months later, on a perfect spring day in the estate's gardens, Easton and Mia were married under the old oak tree where they had shared their first kiss. Emma, wearing a crown of flowers and carrying a basket of rose petals, walked down the aisle ahead of her mother with the serious concentration of someone entrusted with a very important job. The ceremony was small and intimate, attended only by close family and friends. Victoria had insisted on paying for everything, her way of making amends for the years of separation she had caused. But the most precious moments were the quiet ones, when Easton knelt down to promise Emma that he would always be there for her and Mia, when the three of them exchanged family rings that bound them together as the unit they were always meant to be. As the sun set over the gardens that had witnessed their love stories' beginning, middle, and new beginning, Easton held his wife and daughter close. The fairy tale was complete not because it had been easy, but because true love had proven stronger than pride, prejudice, and time itself. Emma looked up at her parents, her blue eyes sparkling with joy. "So the prince really did come back," she said with satisfaction, "just like in Mama's stories." "The very best fairy tales," Mia replied, kissing the top of her daughter's head while Easton's arms tightened around them both, "are the ones that come true." In the distance, the old oak tree rustled its leaves in approval, having kept their secrets safe until love found a way to bring them home again.